Hello, everybody. So I am here, and you are all saying like, I mean, there's a lot of people active in the chat because I'm not here yet. And yes, you're right. It's actually very rare for me to be this late. I'm a full 10 minutes late, which is crazy. The short answer is for why is that I resolved to to basically I'm going to bed later now. And because I'm going to bed, so usually what happens is I go to bed at 10:30 and what am I trying to say? I go to bed at 10:30, meaning that I finish the streams at 10, and that gives me half an hour to clean my teeth, put on my jimmy jammies, read my Bible, say my prayers, get to bed. So basically, give myself half an hour for the morning routine. Anyway, but the point is to get to bed at 10:30, I finish at 10. But now I'm actually going to bed at 11. I have reasons why I'm going to bed at 11. It's it's to do with a change that I made in my morning routine, but it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter, but essentially the reason why I'm here slightly later is because I'm actually like, it doesn't matter as much now if I'm not as quick to stream. Anyway, whatever. So, not to say this is going to be a habit. I have my reasons, but it doesn't matter. Basically, just to do with other things I had going on. Either way, so we're going to jump into this video, which is called How Theology School. Is that what it's called? Theology. How Theology School. Yeah, How Theology School turned me into an atheist. And that's interesting. It's not necessarily surprising. I think, like, theology as a class is a little bit overrated and kind of almost atheistic in its premises in many ways anyway, right? Because theology is about like studying different conceptions of God. Oh, that was the sound of the YouTube short. That's the other reason I'm later, actually. I completely forgot about that. That is my even more legitimate excuse, which is that the this evening's YouTube short hadn't finished rendering yet. Anyway, whatever. Look, there's reasons why I think it could make sense that theology would turn someone atheist, because I think that theology can sometimes be a little bit of a, let's say, ecumenical universalist kind of class, where ultimately it becomes less about the truth of a Christian religion and more, or any particular religion, and more about like studying it, whatever. Anyway, so we will jump in, see what's said. I will say I actually gave this video like a little bit of a click through, and I don't know how much it has in the way of substantial arguments, so I'm definitely going to leave it playing quite a bit. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I want to finish it, but we're not finishing it unless we manage to make it through 1 minute of this video for every 2 minutes. Basically, I'd have to be matching this video in terms of the amount of time I spend responding to it in order to be close to getting it all done in this part. So we'll see what progress we make. I don't know.
Why does theology school create
Oh,
atheists?
let me know if there's like a serious. I mean, I can look myself, so or can I? Wait, I wanted to look at the audio, whatever. For some reason, I have like a load of different audio channels up, which I don't understand why, but yeah, let me know if there's a big difference in the audio.
Like
So
me. Hi, I'm
I
Brooke
think this
Hartley
looks
here at
pretty
No
even.
Nonsense Spirituality. I'm an atheist spiritual director, and I thought I'd share my story of how I lost my faith in theology school, but I also want to talk about the broader experience of why seminary or theological school is essentially like an atheist making machine. So
Yeah,
first of all, just my story real briefly. If you've been following me for any amount of time, I was raised Mormon. I lost faith in like the literal belief that Mormonism is like the one true religion by the time I was a teenager. I was doing what you would call like nuanced Mormonism, like kind of the sense that maybe Mormonism isn't the one true religion, but this is just like one pathway to God, I think is kind of how I was doing it. Because I'm a teenager and I'm trying to reconcile with my family because I got kicked out of my home. But eventually, in early adulthood, I lost faith in Mormonism entirely. And as any Christian will tell you, like, that's great. Like, you lost faith in that religion because that religion is crazy and you had the wrong Jesus, you had the wrong God. So I'm like, fantastic. I'll go to theology school and learn about real Christianity because apparently I just had the wrong religion. So I took this very seriously. I've always, since I was a child, like asked deep questions. And I always figured like,
This is your brain when you're struggling to focus. And this disturbed setting.
if there is a God and there is a right and there is a wrong and there is a specific holy book that's more guided by God than others, this is the most important thing to know. And I thought about it all the time. Like I always was a person who was asking those questions. So this wasn't just like a fun hobby horse for me. This was like this was the driving question of my entire life, which is like, what is, and if there's a God, then
Oh, by the way, I just want to say hello to everyone in the chat, and I'm very delighted to see that you guys were so eager for me to be here. Like, considering that there's been, and I'm, not using this good time to complain about the bad time, but there have been times, certainly earlier on, where I was waiting for a very long time before anyone would show up in the chat. So to have so many people there before I was even there is awesome. So yeah, thank you, Squeaker. Thank you, no, oh yes, you. Nidzala Mamasinga. Is that something like that? Yeah. I recognize you because the benefit of having not really a difficult to pronounce name, because I do understand what Africans especially will say, which is that their names are pretty much just pronounced how they're spelled, compared to my name, which is Michael, by the way. Some people might not know my name is Michael. Michael is not spelled how it's pronounced at all. So, it's... But yeah, for the rest. So, anyway, the point is, it's hard to pronounce from my perspective, but it means I remember you. And of course, Blake, who's a very regular, and Merit Wave, who asks a question, which I don't know how much we can countenance asking irrelevant questions simply because we should say not relevant to the topic of the video, because we do have a lot of the video to get through. But you ask, I think you must have made a typo, because you said in your recent video you mentioned that you don't think the mathematical argument for God isn't a good argument. Could you expand on why, please? I think. So in the video, I said that I think that it is an argument that is unfairly maligned by Matt Dillahunty, because he doesn't seem to understand it, but that I didn't personally think it was top tier, or even particularly close to top tier argument for God. And so I assume that's what you're focusing on, the fact that I said I didn't think it was a really great argument for God. And I think the simple reason is I'm not convinced, but I would say the fundamental premise of the mathematical argument that is the challenge is this idea that true information needs to exist somewhere. I think it is, like, there's some logic to that, and I can sort of get it, but it's in my view, it's very unlikely to convince someone, because it requires such a degree of logical mind bending that it's unlikely to actually change anyone's mind. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be like, "Oh yeah, of course, like mathematical truth needs to exist somewhere." I can kind of get what's being said. Like, and I think the standard argument from with maths is that maths is not something we invented, because there is truth to maths beyond even what we know. Like, how can it be the case that we've invented it when there are numbers that nobody has ever even thought of? Indeed, there are an infinite number of numbers that nobody has ever thought of before. Because even if you listed off every single number anyone has ever thought of in their entire lives, you would still have an infinity of numbers that nobody's thought of. So, in that sense, I kind of understand this idea of, well, how can it be something we've come up with in our heads if the reality of it goes well beyond what we could even conceive of? I think that's kind of persuasive. But I think to therefore say, because it's not something that exists in our mind, it must be something that exists somewhere else. And because it's not a physical thing, maths, like you can't hold and touch it, it doesn't exist in the material world. Therefore, it must exist in some kind of transcendent mind. It's not a bad argument. And I can kind of understand where it's coming from. But again, I just think like this central premise of mathematical truth must exist somewhere is where a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I don't really buy that. Whereas obviously, if you talk about the cosmological argument, I think that's more compelling, because people understand the material world in a much more direct sense.
that's a really important thing to know. So I go to Northwind Theological Seminary, and I'm studying theology. And as you study theology, you're learning more. And
Still some more interesting questions, but I think I'm gonna have to make some more progress before I answer any questions. We'll see how we're doing. So if you've wrote a comment, I am seeing them, and I think, oh, that would be worth us one too. But again, we got to make some progress.
More complexities about the Bible. You're learning how to nuance things. You're learning mysticism. You're learning like Richard Rohr. You're learning how to work with these concepts in order to make sense of things. But it gets increasingly complex as you go through school. And so what ended up happening to me is I had this seed of doubt, I guess you would say, where as you're studying the Bible, you start seeing how God changes based on how that society changes. So, an easy example is like the concept of hell. In the Old Testament, we don't really have a concept of hell. We don't have moral distinctions in the afterlife, because justice and blessings and condemnations happen in this life. Like God's going to take care of it in this life, and then they get conquered, and it's like the bad guys win. So the theology changes, and now we have blessings in the next life because you didn't get the blessings you were promised by being a part of the covenant people. You didn't get it in this life. And so then we start to see moral distinctions in the afterlife. And that's just
Okay, so that's just one tiny thing. Okay, so that's given as an example, and I will say this. So, like I say, I already kind of like clicked through some of the video just so I could get a vibe of what it was about, and what I think has been my takeaway from what I've seen is there are a lack of compelling examples for claims made, and in this case, this isn't a terrible example, but the problem you run into is: are we really going to pretend that the people in the Bible, they didn't have lots of oppression in the Old Testament? I mean, the thing is, obviously, you could run into the issue of, well, I don't really know if I believe the Old Testament, in which case, or rather, like, you don't believe the Old Testament is historically accurate. Because obviously the first thing I could say is, well, Exodus. Why would it not be that during the time of Exodus they would have come up with this idea of hell and said, oh, but, maybe she'd say, well, we don't really believe in Exodus. Okay, fine. The Book of Judges. Book of Judges, you have many examples of Israel repeatedly being conquered by all of these other people. And, of course, they have the judges to deliver them. But that gets to the other issue, which is that, of course, the Jews always believed there was going to be this Messiah to deliver them. So even during times of hardship, they already had that kind of, if you like, from an, let's say, atheistic perspective, coping mechanism. So why would they come up with the idea of hell in addition to that? Like, that is kind of another blind spot here. And again, even if you were to say that you don't think the Book of Judges is accurate, which, maybe it's not. I certainly know by the time we get to the Book of Kings, at that point we are talking history that's very much corroborated by the archaeological record. But okay, let's say you don't take Judges seriously. Well, even so, you'd have to ask, well, if the Jews wrote this book about how they were being conquered and oppressed by lots of people, because that's what the Book of Judges is about. All these times Israel was conquered and oppressed by the Philistines, the Midianites, all these different groups. It is the Midianites, right? I hope I'm not being a complete idiot there. Am I being an idiot? I don't know, whatever, anyway. I don't care. The Amalekites, right? The Amalekites. I feel it really should know, like, all the different groups that do the conquering in Judges, but whatever. Anyway, if they had this idea in their narrative, you kind of think, well, surely then, if you are arguing that those ideas would have impacted on this development of the idea of hell, why did those ideas not have an impact earlier? And then there's the final issue, which is, of course, that a lot of the Old Testament was written after the Babylonian exile. A lot of the prophetic books were written after the Babylonian exile. So, yeah, this idea, to me, it seems, and this is probably a concern I'll reiterate, that it's actually based on this very limited view of historicism that most historians don't really agree with. It's kind of like, Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Like, apparently, insofar as historians don't like that, they say, well, we don't like the fact that he's reduced it just to these things. And that's the thing, whenever there's like any historian who tries to say, well, it's all about this thing, it usually ends up there sort of contriving things. And I feel like that's kind of the case here. Like, it's hard to believe that this isn't just, you look back and you come up with an explanation. You look back and you say, oh, that they didn't have this doctrine of hell, then they did have this doctrine of hell it must be because of this thing that happened in between.
one tiny thing, and then you start to read thousands of these things where
Okay.
something there's some kind of change with the society, and then all of a sudden the god changes. And what happened to me is I got
Yeah, and just for the record, I don't think there is any meaningful change in the God of the Old Testament, or well, sorry, let me rephrase that: the God of the Bible. Like, there's no like huge change where I would be like, oh, that stands out as something that you'd think would be explained by society. And then, of course, I mean, let's not forget the biggest change, and this is a change in the perception. Obviously, God himself doesn't change, but a change in the perception of God would be the Trinity. But I don't know, like what is the historical? It's not immediately obvious to me what the historical changes in society that led to the development of the Trinity. That's just So, and that's like the most obvious standout thing, right?
so good at that, not just in Christianity, but as I'm studying other religions too, that I got to the point where you could give me a society, tell me how their agriculture works, tell me, how the social hierarchy works, tell me about how often the flooding is, tell me about the weather. Even if you tell me all those things, this is more of like the cognitive science of religion, or anthropology. And if you give me all those things, I'll be able to tell you what kind of God they created. And I started getting so good at that game that I was always right. And I could now predict, okay, if this happens, this change in this society happens, or you could just give me a people and tell me how it works, and I'll tell you kind of what God they have. Um,
Oh, goodness me, too many adverts.
and that became something that I got very good at. And then
So I'm just gonna say this right away, and I just have to say this. I don't believe it. I don't actually believe that it's kind of I don't know. It's I honestly feel like a lot of the time atheists will overstate their knowledge. Like they'll reach a point where I genuinely feel like there are a lot of atheists who will be like, oh yeah, I read the Bible and it turned me into an atheist. And what they really mean is I got halfway through Genesis and having not really done any research into what exactly was being meant by these stories or anything like that, I just decided that this was stupid and I didn't believe it anymore. Like that's kind of the like vibe I often get from atheists when they say things like that. And in the same sense, you get that exaggeration. I'm feeling that same vibe here where I'm like, I don't really think that this woman got to a point where she was doing this. I feel like maybe this happened like a couple of times. She made some connections, like had a lucky guess or two, and she was like, "Yeah, I've completely mastered this. Every single uh, religion has." And I mean, it's a bit weird because I would say most religions of the world do not have particularly robust theologies. Like I don't really know how someone could look at ancient Greece and say, "Oh well, I'm getting some strong Zeus vibes here." Because what even is the theology of Greek paganism? It's just like I genuinely can't think of any particular aspect. So obviously, maybe you could say, well, if a place has more mountains, they'll have gods of mountains or whatever. Like, which is not that impressive. Like, if you know that you're dealing with a polytheistic society where they have different gods for different elements of the world, then I'll have certain gods be more significant for certain elements of their natural world that would have been more significant in that culture. But yeah, I just don't buy this at all. I think it's a lie.
further than that, you also get to see how individuals,
Lightning means Zeus Anki.
what kinds of individuals create what kinds of gods. And so certain personality types will create different kinds of gods. If you are really high in moral disgust, if like disgust is something that you feel very strongly in your body, you're going to have a god that has the same kind of moral disgust that you do.
Okay,
If you're
so I was
autistic,
gonna say like I was like I'm not really sure how you have different like how many people have created gods because I was thinking about like do we know who created Quetzalcoatl? Do we know who created Ra? Do we know who created Ganesha or whatever? But to be fair, I think the argument being made here is that people have a generic idea of God that they create in their own image, and maybe again, it seems like this kind of seems obvious in that if we're talking about someone who their view of God is not scripturally grounded, but just based on vibes, then yeah, probably it will be a God who lines up with their beliefs. But then you have like someone like me. I don't have. I don't feel like my conception of God especially lines up with my personality in any particular way. I mean, God is really like merciful and stuff, and I'm full of wrath.
You tend to be either fundamentalist or you tend to be atheist, but not so much in between. If you have high levels of empathy, you're going to read Jesus as someone different than someone who reads Jesus who has high
Hello, Strigata, by the way.
core values of loyalty, or even authority. And so you get so good at that that I had this thought that this was like the thread that started to pull the whole thing apart of what if we're the ones that create gods rather than God creating us. Because I got so good at that game of knowing how individuals and societies create gods and why they do, like the psychology.
So I think one other issue with this is it only has to be wrong once for there to be a valid religion, right? Because the thing is, it kind of makes sense that if there is a god, but human beings are rebellious, most people will create a god in their image, and therefore you will have gods that reflect cultures, that reflect individual personalities, because most people are trying to make up their own god because most people are rebellious. But I know, of course, I mean, people say like even atheists have their own gods, and that's kind of the thing people say. And yeah, in some poetic sense, you could say that's true. But obviously, then the question becomes, well, in the case, and for the record, like even with religions I don't agree with, like Islam, like Judaism, like Catholicism, I wouldn't just say, oh, the reason they formed was because of the culture they came from. Like, I just don't like that. I don't see any logic there. When I think about like my big issues with Islam, like yeah, okay, you could say part of it is that it's very warring Islam. Like it's got a lot more of a focus on violence, and in these desert nomadic groups, they probably did have a lot more war, a lot more hardship. But then you think, well, the Mongols didn't come up with Islam. Like, there's lots of places where there are these nomadic groups who probably had all sorts of different wars going on, but they didn't all come up with Islam. So, yeah, I just am not seeing in any way this connection. So, I guess there's kind of two levels of that. One, I'm thinking, well, even if this is the case, we're talking probably about human rebelling against God. But then two, even for the other religions, which I would say are also false, I'm not necessarily even seeing that connection. And of course, this leads to the big thing, which is in the case of Christianity, I'm not really seeing this at all. And the only evidence you've given has not been especially compelling.
In sociology behind that.
Oh, yes. Hello. Yes, I am a Christian.
So again, like the first move that you would make with that, which everyone makes when they have this thought, is okay, maybe we're all accessing God in our different ways. And this is like one of the stops on deconstruction that I feel like everybody goes to. What if this is all like facets of the same diamond? Or like, as a parent, my kids bring out different sides of me. Maybe I'm more playful with one kid because that's what they need from me. But I'm more, snuggly with another one because that's
I like the kind of weirdness of not just thinking maybe other people are wrong.
what they need from me, right? And so eventually you go into this like interfaith place where yes, it seems like there's a lot of human stuff going on with this God.
See, I sometimes get people ask, like, oh, why is it there's this connection between atheism and a lot of postmodernism? Surely, like, aren't atheists supposed to be rational? Aren't they supposed to be logical? Why would they buy into all of this postmodernism that says there is no ultimate truth? There is no definitions for concepts like, obviously man and woman, but, many other things as well. Why would they be the ones who are pushing all this stuff if they're supposed to be the logical ones? They're supposed to be the ones about science and all that. But I think actually it's not that surprising when you realize that central to atheism is this inability to appreciate that people can have varying ideas about complex topics, that are nonetheless either true or false. What an atheist does is they look at the fact that God is this like complex, he's beyond space and time. He's not something you can just kind of observe in a laboratory. There is this complexity to this idea of theology. And then they notice lots of people disagree. And they say, well, it's not reasonable for us to think that anyone is right about this topic while other people are wrong. So when confronted with a complex question, they just default to, well, anyone saying that they have a correct view, which would be exclusivist and suggesting other people's opinions are wrong, that must be illegitimate. Therefore, we should abandon this entire kind of domain of fact finding. And it seems to me it's the exact same thing with these broader notions of truth and logic, where as soon as people start having these contentions, an atheist is forced to say, well, ultimately this is a very complicated topic, lots of people disagree, so we're just going to have to abandon this thing entirely. And that's why I think many atheists end up becoming postmodernists.
Game that we're playing. But that doesn't mean that there's not a God. It just means that, we're accessing God through our, human biases and through our filters, and we see through a glass darkly, right? And so that sustained my faith for a while. And I see a lot of people end up there too, where they maybe lose faith in like the God of the Bible, but they still would believe in something like a higher power that we're all accessing through these different religions. And then that started to also break down for me too, because once I had essentially the courage to say, okay, what would it look like if religion and God was a human?
Before Upload, one of my teachers told me that, maybe, and
I know someone's going to say, oh, why don't you just have what's it called? Ad block. Thing is, I still get messages, like, I still get my internet crashing from, like, them saying, oh, stop running ad block, even when I'm not running ad block. I don't know. It's weird. To be honest, maybe I should just run ad block. Because, yeah, genuinely, I do get messages like, oh, we don't allow ad block. I'm like, I don't have ad or whatever.
And I put those lenses on. Things started to make more and more sense. So when I started to look at, for example, like near-death experiences from a more secular viewpoint at what's going on at the...
I'm actually going to get some water real quick because I'm very thirsty. But I'm just going to leave this. I'm going to do a bit of a Hassan. I'm going to leave it playing and just trust that whatever's said, I'll be able to respond to when I get back.
Level of the brain. It started to make more sense. When you start to look at religion as what societies do, because we co-evolve with religion, it gives us a lot of things that we need psychologically and socially, and it helps us with our existential fears. It started to make more sense. When you start looking at claims of the supernatural, when you start looking at holy books, if you put on the lens of, okay, let's just look at this, maybe I'm not convinced, I'm just going to try this on, because my thing was always like, if there is a truth, it can withstand the questions of my small tiny...
I do love the color palette of my wardrobe. Isn't this lovely? It's kind of, you got like the the brown here, kind of grey brown, then dark strident firm blue, and then a kind of muted pastel blue. Sorry, I said this is green. Muted pastel blue. It's a nice combination. I do clean up nice, don't I? And then the red poppy. Yes. Do you plan on having conversations with any atheists? Yes, I do. I think that would be really interesting. And I think my initial thought is kind of like atheists who kind of have discussions in the comment section. I'm kind of like, someone was like, oh, it would be interesting to actually talk to these guys. And I mean, to be honest, like, a lot of the time I see comments, I'm like, man, this is a very dumb comment, and I want to make fun of it, which I actually do want to do, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, Strigar says I volunteer. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I should. You're right. I think maybe it's something that I'll kind of aim to start doing in the new year, because I think there's a lot of value to something like that. Anyway, the thing about... something else I'm trying to work on is not saying like. So every single time I say like, make fun of me. Unless I'm saying that I like something. But this thing I do of... I don't know, I do it all the time. And I'm going to... I want to avoid it because I don't like don't like. I'm allowed to say it there. I don't like that I do it so much. Anyway, the thing is, this is interesting for me coming from the perspective as someone who was an atheist and then became convinced Christianity is true. Because when I look at the world, it doesn't make sense to me to say that Christianity is just a human invention. There's lots of aspects of that don't make sense. The bizarre, convenient time of it. Like, I think the main thing that just is insane to me is the confluence of the fact that Jesus managed to align with so many prophecies, a lot of which couldn't have even really worked with, like, they couldn't have been under his control. A good example is John the Baptist. The fact that it was said that there would be Elijah, and then Elijah would prepare the way for Jesus, and yet John the Baptist, we know he was a historical figure. So how does that work? How does it work that Jesus happened to have this really famous... that works perfectly with the Elijah and then preparing the way of the Lord prophecy, whatever. But then the fact that also happens to line up with the convenient historical timing of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, where Christianity was able to spread incredibly far. And just the time, all of that timing is insane. The fact that also it spread into Europe, which would then go on to become the dominant country of the world. I feel like you either have to argue that there's some deterministic relationship where Christianity causes civilizations to succeed, or you have to believe it's an insane amount of luck that Christianity went from being this little, from an atheist perspective, like this little cult in Judea, to suddenly becoming the, at least nominally, dominant religion of 5.5 continents, right? That's 5.5 continents. Europe, North America, South America, Antarctica. I would imagine that insofar as there are religious people in Antarctica, most of those researchers are Christian, or at least come from Christian civilizations. Australasia, and then 5.5, the southern half of Africa. The only places left is Asia. Still plenty of Christians in Asia, but not so many. And obviously North Africa. But yeah, it's insane.
Human brain. And so I just started to put on the lens of like, what if humans were doing this?
Yeah, that's a good point, Metaphysics. Like, I should also speak to some atheist YouTubers. I'd be interested to speak to Mindshift, just because he seems to be... I'm not intimidated by him, but he also seems to be pretty useful.
What would it look? What would this look like? And across the board, it just started to make more sense. So an example of this is like most people today, even Christians, when someone has schizophrenia, they don't say this person has demons and it has been taken over by demons and needs an exorcism. That still happens. It's much more rare. Most people today will say, you know what, that person has schizophrenia. This is a mental health disorder that needs to be dealt with at the level of the brain with the whatever current science that we have on schizophrenia. And that's when you look at the two and compare, is it schizophrenia or is it demons? It becomes a lot more clear. Okay, I think we have some more information here. I think schizophrenia better explains what's happening with this person than some supernatural explanation, right? That's an easy example I think most people are on board with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know about the whole demon thing, because there definitely are a lot of people who... Maybe it does make sense to say it's demon. I mean, like, also the other issue I think people have is that people's minds have been corrupted by, like, The Exorcist and, all the kind of media that makes demons seem like this overtly supernatural phenomenon that, people experience in that way. But then, so let's say the guy who Jesus heals or exercises, who kind of has the whole like, we are legion for we are many and all that kind of stuff. Let's be honest, you don't have to walk too far around some of the... I mean, Canada, they've legalized all the drugs now, so they've got Canada. Yeah, I mean, goodness me, I took one foot in Canada. I was like, I can't believe there are people who genuinely think legalizing drugs is a good idea. But yeah, the number of mentally deranged homeless people you'll find in Canada is insane. You do not have to walk far in any Canadian city before you will find someone who is that level of crazy, where they'll be like, I've got demons in my head and they're talking to me, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they'll say. But you say, okay, so what is that? Is that schizophrenia or demons? And I would say, well, why not both? Because I would say that it is completely reasonable to think that demons are and to us, there's also the possible metaphorical interpretation, if you like, but if we're going to go for a spiritual interpretation, which I think is also perfectly valid, then demons are these forces that influence people in negative ways. So I would say that alcoholism is often a demonic issue. Many addictions are demonic issues, but a lot of mental health is a demonic issue. I think I haven't actually said this before on this channel. I mean, certainly since I've been doing live streams, this is something I often neglect to tell people, even though it's really strange. One reason I don't like telling people this, to be fair, is because I worry that they'll think this is the entire reason why I'm a Christian. It is not. But I will say this. I had a panic attack when I was 18 years old, going on 19. And shortly before I had that panic attack, like a while ago, but pretty close. So not close enough that it was like an immediate thing, but close enough that there's a reasonable connection here. I genuinely had a really strange experience where I was lying in bed, about to go to sleep, and I swear I saw a flaming face coming up from the floor. It was like I was like lying in bed. I was kind of lying, like looking down like this. So I was kind of looking down at the floor, and I swear I saw a flaming face coming up and like hit me in the head. And then I was like, that was weird. That was a weird hallucination I just had. And then a few weeks later, I think, I started developing a really serious anxiety disorder. I'm not going to say that that is a kind of concrete enough reason to declare that my anxiety is caused by some kind of demonic force. I certainly don't think that I can say that everyone's anxiety is caused by a demonic force, but I don't think we should be so quick to think that, well, their eyes didn't turn black and their head didn't start spinning round, so isn't it silly to say it's a demon thing?
But then I started to do that with everything, like literally everything when it comes to God and spiritual experience and awe and transcendence, and people seeing God on mushrooms and near-death experiences and dreams and scripture and holy text and how you feel when you sing. And I started to look at that and say, is there a better explanation?
Exorcist. Yeah, but I think I've heard people say that Christians can't be possessed by devils. So therefore, I would imagine that if there's any kind of thing going on, because the issue is I still do struggle with anxiety. So I wouldn't really want to believe that as a safe Christian, I am still possessed by a demon. I think that would be contrary to the Bible, because I think the Bible makes it pretty clear that, we have an authority over the demons, but whatever. Anyway, nonetheless, so if that was the case, it could be a case of there's actually a residual effect from it, but I don't know. And yeah, again, it's one of those things where weirdly I didn't even think about it until it's a weird combination of things, because basically I had that experience, then I had a panic attack, then I became a Christian, and there was a degree of separation between all three of those things. So, and then it wasn't until a significant while later, as a Christian, now even considering the possibility of demons existing, I then thought, wow, that was a weird experience when that happened. But yeah. And I'll also say this. I think it's possible that the thought of a demon existing as a possibility kind of influenced my memory of that event. Because from my perspective, I do remember it as definitely being a very strange experience that felt unlike it certainly wasn't a dream because I was awake, but it felt very strange. But then whatever. Anyway, I don't know. We should make some progress for the video, but yeah.
When you're looking
Oh, I have an anxiety disorder myself. Luckily, I can avoid mine by not in taking caffeine. Yeah, the one thing with that is I actually am trying to sort of vaguely wean myself onto caffeine, just because I'm kind of like, well, if I drink caffeine in a controlled way, then I can kind of get used to the intense energy and sort of deal with it.
At this from the side of this is a human project, and the answer was yes. And I
Oh,
didn't
oh yeah. Sorry, Nadzulunga. Sorry, you said yeah. You said your church does. You also said something else interesting that where did I see it? I thought I saw you say something about your issue with you had a slight issue, Cobb, but I can't see the comment here. So oh, anyway, whatever. We'll make some progress, but I'll go back and read some comments if we have time, which we're not going to have time, but whatever.
want that answer. That's what I really want other people to know, is that a lot of people see my content now and they'll say, she wants to prove, I want to sin. I want to prove that God isn't real. And because I'm prideful, because I'm just this atheist. Like, you have to realize that I was trying these ideas on because I'm a truth seeker, and I believed that.
Here's how I clear my inbox in minutes and hit send.
That the truth mattered, and that the truth could stand up to scrutiny. But I didn't want these answers. I really didn't want these answers. This is not what I was looking for. I was teaching seminary. I was teaching teenagers from the Bible. I was, in a marriage where, my husband was a believer. I was raising my child at the time in church, and everything in my life was built on, which is common for people who go into theology school, everything in my life was built on the idea of faith. Not just like, my friends and my family and my community, but my identity and my sense of purpose and my sense of morality and my sense of meaning. And
I don't know why I've decided to have the subtitles on for this, but whatever. I decided that. Look, yeah, regarding the whole like, oh, I didn't want this. I was very sincere about being Christian, and it was a big surprise to me. Obviously, like, fine. I was like I say, I was an atheist. I didn't go into religion wanting it to be true, but whatever. This isn't a competition. It's kind of interesting. People talk a lot about the non-resistant non-believer in terms of people who were never religious. It's, I guess, maybe you could say, an even more drop something more interesting question. How could it be that someone who genuinely wanted to know ended up being led astray? I don't know. I think a huge block for a lot of people in terms of becoming religious is a desire to be perceived as intelligent, which means that they basically can't bring themselves to make that leap of faith that in their mind is irrational. So I don't know whether that's the case for this woman, but I think that's like a big issue. Some people are like, well, I can't turn it into a logical syllogism, so how am I going to believe it?
how I make decisions, and just literally every aspect of my life was built on there being a God.
What's interesting here, of course, is she hasn't mentioned doctrine of salvation. And that's obviously, like, if you're missing that, you're missing everything. If you're talking about your experience of Christianity and it doesn't center around, I was a sinner and I knew that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and that based on believing that I could go to heaven, if that's not what you're saying, that's like a big red flag. It's a red flag in terms of the possibility of you still being saved.
So I didn't like any of these answers. And when it got time for me to write my dissertation, as I was thinking about what to write my dissertation about, I gotten to the point where I had to be honest with myself that I no longer believe in God. Once you put on that lens to see, is there a better way to explain this from the point of view of secularism or this being a human project? Does it make more sense? And the answer was yes. So I never did write my dissertation. Maybe one day I'll go back and write something. I don't see, even now, I don't even know what I would write. Maybe I'll go back at some point and write something just so I can finish the thing. But I never wrote that dissertation, and I dropped out of theology school, and, had nothing at the time and had to rebuild, which I've talked about in other episodes. And so I learned that this is a very common experience, that I'm not the only person.
Oh, by the way, this is a religious. Sorry, so this video was suggested by a lot of people. I looked at some of the other videos from this channel. There's not really many that jumped out as, oh, that's really worth responding to, personally.
Who went into theology to be able to find God or get closer to God, and then ends up losing God in the process. It's actually a very, very common thing that happens, to the point now that churches are starting to try to make their own kind of higher education, because they know if they send these kids to theology school, that half of them they're never going to see again, because they're going to lose their faith in the process. So now I want to talk about why it is that way. Not just my story, but now kind of the broader story of what's going on in theology school in America, and what is the data that we have on that, and then kind of where that leads us. And I also want to talk about.
Yep.
I want to tell you the New Testament.
Oh, no.
Kind of the big secret of.
We almost got goymed.
As someone who's been in that circle, there was like this TikTok that went viral that asked, what's something that's common in your field that everybody knows, but the general population doesn't know? And so I do want to give some of those like insider perspectives at some point. But let's start with the data that we do have on theology school in general. So the big study that people cite a lot is the Daniel Dennett study called Preachers Who Are Not Believers, which was in 2013. And this qualitative research is one of the most cited studies in this area. They interviewed Protestant clergy who had lost their belief in God, and usually it was during seminary, and a lot of them continued to work in ministry roles. And so many reported that seminary was the turning point in their deconversion. And aspects of that was like exposure to higher criticism, understanding biblical authorship, that, the people writing these books are not people who were just like walking around with Jesus taking notes. These were stories that were passed around campfires for decades, and then someone wrote them down, and that starts to all break down. And then you get into the biblical contradictions, and you get to the mythical elements, and you get into just the mess of what the Bible is. In addition to philosophical training, if you get part of that in your seminary. And one of the pastor's quotes from the study was, seminary is where faith goes to die, because as soon as you start to look at this thing, it starts to fall apart.
So yeah, I mean, the big issue here is you kind of have to be wondering what was these people's faith before they came to seminary? What were they basing it in, and how was it that they were only discovering for the first time that the Bible was written the way it was, which of course it was written by historians. I mean, Luke, he walked around talking to people who knew Jesus. This idea that it was, like Jesus's personal diary or something is obviously not true. Yeah, I'm not sure why there were people who were basing their faith in that perception of the Bible in the first place. But obviously I've not been to theology school or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe you learn even more, and maybe it really just makes everything. But the thing is, what I will say is I've not seen any compelling evidence from people who supposedly have been to theology school to make me think, oh wow, that's really destroyed all my faith. Let's see. Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, someone said there were some pretty hardcore fundies. Yeah, and I think that makes sense, right? If someone's gone to theology school thinking that the Bible is, I don't know, like not got any of these issues, then I guess that would be concerning for them. But obviously, because I'm just thinking. I mean, I know someone who went to seminary, and he's still a Christian, but then he's reformed. So I'm not sure from his perspective where it comes from.
So it's this weird situation I meet every day where people who don't study the Bible tell me what's in it. And then people who've actually studied the Bible tell you that it's complex, that it's contradictory, that it's myth on top of translation, on top of myth, on top of a scribe adding something.
Okay. See, the thing about like study the Bible is if you study the Bible, you're reading the Bible often. all of this, like, when you are reading a significant amount more extra biblical theology about the Bible, is I think when you're in trouble, because that's when you start over intellectualizing things and coming up with so many explanations for how the text says something more than what it says. And this is how, of course, you got like just the complete nonsense, like the eye of the needle is actually this gate in Jerusalem. That's not true. That's a completely made up thing. People acknowledge it's made up, but the origins of that came from Bible colleges. Like that idea, and there was a time when you could actually find study Bibles that would have a picture of a gate into Jerusalem and say, this is the eye of the needle. This is a famous gate that was at Jerusalem. But no, like now most people know that's not. Oh, I mean, there are still many people who do believe that because they learned it. But again, it's this thing of, it's a thing that really annoys me, which is this trying to outsmart the source material, trying to come up with all these complicated explanations because you've stopped actually just reading the Bible for what it is.
Something here on top of this person says that it's from this apostle, but it's probably not. It's some of the prophecies don't come true, and it's not often written by the apostle that it claims to be. And when it comes to Jesus, of course, like these aren't eyewitnesses at all, and sometimes God loses battles, or sometimes God commands genocide and slavery, and God changes a lot based on how the society changes, and it's just a mess. And when you go into theology school, especially if you were kind of raised in church, you don't think that the Bible is like that, because you're taught that the Bible is like, this is the word of God, and this is the doctrine here, and it.
Oh wow! I didn't know these existed until I saw them.
Wow! I
didn't
didn't know these existed.
It comes across as if it's this more.
Strugard, there are so many contradictions in the Bible. It's very clear and easy to find them, and for me, really hard to understand them. Well, I would say I'm not sure how many. I don't know. If someone said name a blatant contradiction in the Bible, I would actually say I don't, off the top of my head, know of one. That's me. Just I think there probably are some, but I genuinely can't name one off the top of my head though, like a contradiction. And I'm talking a contradiction that cannot be reconciled. I think probably the closest would be stuff that I think there's a lot of stuff with numbers in the Old Testament where some of the numbers don't quite add up. But again, yes, I think that is a very relevant verse. Roy Alzono, yeah.
Solid thing, and when you start studying it, it starts falling apart. And we also have the Clergy Project, which was founded from the research from Daniel Dennett, where now there's a support group for the clergy members who don't fully believe anymore, either as active pastors or former pastors, and most of them lost their faith in school. And so former pastors will often talk about this crisis that happened when they start reading people like Bart Ehrman, learning about historical Jesus, encountering theodicy problems, theodicy being, the problem of evil, which is a really hard problem to solve. Why did God have to sacrifice himself in order to redeem his own creation when I can just forgive without any additional violence? What does that mean that I can do something good that God can't? Why did God create a system where animals suffer for no salvific reason? Because they don't learn moral lessons when they are being eaten alive. Why have millions of years of animal suffering for no reason?
I think you should watch the videos before you respond to them so you can give more structured and deeper responses. I'm not trying to be rude. That is an okay thing to say. I think there's a few reasons why I don't do that. There's basically two reasons why I don't do that, and then, well, that's it. But basically, so number one is because I think sometimes I actually enjoy having the off-the-cuff reactions when very silly points are made. I think, for example, responding to Mindshift, that would have been much less entertaining if I already knew all of the misrepresentations he was going to present. The second reason is because in many ways I view what I'm doing here to be good. I mean, someone asked actually earlier on, why don't I have conversations with atheists? Why don't I invite atheists on for having conversations? And I'm sure, thought someone might have had as well, why don't you debate people? And obviously, what is good practice for that is watching this stuff, not knowing what's going to be said, because that means I have to think on my feet in terms of how I'm responding to it. So that's pretty much my attitude towards it. I feel like, and the other thing I should say is I don't feel like I've given any particularly lacking responses. I think the biggest error that I've had recently was when I was not fully prepared for Mindshift to make a misrepresentation of John 7, and I kind of just glossed over it, and I could have actually picked up the Bible later on or at the time and said, oh wait, you can see how he's massively misrepresenting this. But yeah, oh yes, okay, let's see. Nidzalama says, what do you think about the flood? I saw a TikTok talking about it and why God ended the lives of children, because in the Bible he didn't warn anybody. Okay, so you're talking about from a moral perspective, what do I think of it? Well, again, it seems like a very obvious thing to say. I understand in a way why people kind of struggle with this, but considering the fact that everybody who dies because of God, right? Because God invented life and God invented death. So really, in my view, that's just kind of like God's purview, like God's prerogative to do that. And therefore, God can basically kill anyone he wants at any time. If I die at any point in my life, that will be because God has ordained it to be so. Thank you so much, darling. Give it up. By the way, yeah, I've never... You may be wondering who is the person who always opens my door and puts something on my desk at the same time. It's because before I go to bed, I have a cup of chamomile tea, so I drink it while I'm doing the thing, and that's my lovely wife who gets that for me. So big her up. Anyway, yes. But yeah, essentially, God has every right to take anyone's life because he created all life. And I don't really see the issue there, and that's that basically.
Starving, 99% going extinct.
I want hot chocolate, please. I do want to have some hot chocolate, to be fair. We need to use up some milk over here, so I should work on that.
Without humans even there. That's just cruel. So if God can interact with man, why be silent for most of human history? Just imagine how scary 99 when I can just forgive without any additional violence. What does that mean that I can do something good that God can't? Why did...
Okay, so just for record, you're saying you can do something good that God can't. You are granting there that it is because of your goodness that you are able to pass over someone doing something evil. Why could it not be the case that actually it's because of your own sin that you are able to do that? Because it's very easy to forgive someone for something bad they've done for you when you yourself have definitely done bad things in your own life. So actually you have a self-interested motivation to forgive people because the Bible says, judge not lest ye be judged. But in the case of God, he doesn't have a self-interested reason to forgive us. From his perspective, sin is just utterly repulsive to him. So actually, it's not a case of you can do something good that God can't. It's a case of you do something evil that God doesn't. Right.
God create a system where animals suffer for no salvific reason because they don't learn moral lessons when they are being eaten alive? Why have millions of years of animal suffering for no reason? Starving, 99% going extinct without humans even there. That's just cruel. So if God can interact with man, why be silent for most of human history?
Okay, yeah, I actually have an opinion on the animal suffering thing, but this is a really popular argument from Alex O'Connor, so I think I'm just going to leave it here, and we'll talk about it later, because, when someone's like quick firing all these arguments, I don't think it's always particularly productive to go through all of them.
When just imagine how scary it would have been to be a human 5,000 years ago. You don't know why people drop dead. You don't know why there's an earthquake. You don't know why the sun comes up. And most people who have ever lived have never heard of the correct God, whatever that God is.
So that's probably not true. Because there's like an interesting, and it's annoying because in a way, like now the population is as big as it is and so many people are dying. This statistic is probably out of date by now, but I think it's something like 7% of people who have ever lived are alive right now. Now, yeah, again, I'm sure that's probably a bit out of date because there's going to be a whole load of people who have died, and obviously at some point the population is going to taper off. That is a mind-boggling statistic, because it's with reference to a time when the population is massively growing and grew quite rapidly. But with that said, it gets to the fact that there was time, I believe I'm right, in the time of the Victorians, there was a guy called Thomas Malthus, and he thought that it would be impossible for the globe to sustain a population of 1 billion people. Obviously now the population is 8 billion people. So in reality, actually, I don't think it is true that the majority, and again, I'm not sure exactly how the statistics break down. Obviously, you could say, well, 7%, that's not the majority. But that's 7% of people are alive right now. So then you imagine, since 1500 AD, there have been Christians in the New World. The New World wasn't that well populated. But yeah, there have certainly been many Christians all over the Old World since 1 AD. I would imagine it's very easily the case that the majority of people who have ever lived have lived this side of 1 AD, because again, there were very few civilizations before then. So I actually don't know if it's necessarily true that the majority of people have died without, lived and died without ever knowing the one true God.
This is the question that even Richard Rohr, the Christian mystic, who I actually really like, says troubles him the most, which is, why would God create man to be so superstitious? What was the point of all of that? What is the point of all of this? And all of these problems you start to take seriously when you study the Bible, when you study philosophy, when you study religious commentary, when you start studying other...
In Isaiah 45:7, it says God creates evil himself. So yeah, this is actually an interesting thing, and I arguably shouldn't use the word evil, because evil isn't quite the same thing as sin. People have pointed this out. In the Bible, typically, evil refers to a bad thing that happens to someone, whether it is sinful or not. So the flood was evil because it was a bad thing that happened to somebody. And basically, yeah, so when evil is done to someone, that just means doing them wrong, and not necessarily in an unjustified way. So with that said, that would be a very obvious explanation for what it means when it says that God creates evil. He creates the good things in your life and the bad things, but that does not mean that that he creates sin, because obviously sin is a human impulse.
Religions, and seeing that things like virgin births are something that we do all the time. When you start studying the cognitive science of religion, and what becomes more and more clear is that this is a human project, this project of creating gods and everyone being sure of their religion, even though millions of gods have already died and no longer are being worshipped.
Bold and brash. I don't think I've seen a comment from you yet. I hate how vague she's being. She just quick fires issues without providing specific things for us to attack. Yes. So, yeah, in some sense I get it, but I think, and one of the issues here is that this video is partially autobiographical. It's one of those things where when you have a video that's not directly called, these are the reasons why I am not a Christian, or these are the reasons why I am an atheist, you kind of have the issue of, can you necessarily expect it to be a comprehensive explanation of her reasons? It's kind of just saying, this is why people are disappointed with theology school. And it's like, well, maybe these are the reasons, or rather, why people become atheists at theology school. And maybe these are the reasons why people become atheists at theology school, but I just don't think, like that. It's almost like she's not even putting herself out there by saying these are in and of themselves compelling arguments. But yeah, it is very quick fire. And certainly she's been very vague with her claims about, I could just look at the history of the world and see what religions were emerging.
Eventually you start to take that step back as you are learning all of this and looking at this from different perspectives, where you start to have the thought of, it's like metacognition almost for the first time, where you start to say, hey, just because I feel this thing when there's a key change in a song about Jesus, maybe that actually doesn't mean that my religion is true and everyone else's is false. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like this is one of those things where for me, I I really don't enjoy the singing. Like that's the thing, like that's it's really wild to me because I remember one time when I was looking for a new church, I went to a church that just had like 50. It was 50% well, more than 50. The majority of the service was singing, and then you had like a 15-minute little sermonette. And the sermon wasn't even like, he didn't actually open the Bible and read from it once. He was just like, God can do miraculous things in your life. If you want to be here, as you can probably pick up, it was kind of very charismatic, which I wasn't expecting. And yeah, basically. But the thing is, I was like, oh, this is tedious. Like, we're just singing and singing and singing. And I didn't really think about the fact that I guess there are some people for whom that is just like the best thing ever. Like in their head, like, yeah, singing. Don't get me wrong, like there are some songs that give me emotional highs, but to be honest, like actually the songs that give me the biggest emotional highs are because of the doctrinal substance of those songs. And like, yeah, that's where I'm at. Like, and on that cross where Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. Just that's a very powerful expression of a statement. And yeah, that's where I'm at. I don't really care too much about the impact of the tune, the melody or whatever.
Something bigger is going on. And then you start, asking that question.
Yes, someone's saying, so the story about the young men in Kings is a little bit misrepresented. There's actually a lot going on there, but one of the things that's kind of unappreciated is that they are threatening his life, seemingly. So the significant bit of context is that this is just after, I hope I'm going to get the people the right way around, Elijah has just gone up to heaven. We know that Elijah ascended to heaven. And then shortly after that, these boys, again, it's not exactly clear what that means. Does it mean like 7-year-olds? Probably not. Maybe it could mean 12, 13-year-olds, possibly. It's hard to say because of, like at that point, maybe they would have been pubescent, whatever. But again, probably not children. But they say, go up to Elisha. And there's I think, pretty credible case for that in the context of Elijah having just ascended to heaven is them saying, hey, go up, meaning go and die. Go up to heaven like Elijah did. So now obviously, just threatening someone's life, that's not necessarily in and of itself just a terrible thing to do. But then you imagine, well, what might they have been doing to justify the fact that they were saying this? Perhaps they were surrounding him, being aggressive, saying, oh, we're going to kill you, in so many words. And then it's a slightly different story. The ridiculous framing of it is that they're just making fun of him for being bold. There's a wider substance to the fact they're making fun of him being bold too, which is that Elijah was very hairy. So the fact they're making fun of Elisha for being bold is because they are arguing that he is not a legitimate successor to Elijah.
Question of what does it look like to try to explain holy books and gods and religions, and why we co-evolved with religion from a secular point of view. And then
we lost people that I knew throughout the Falklands, so you're living the poppy appear.
I will say, this is my hot take. I don't think that the poppy should represent any war other than World War One, because as soon as you get to other wars, you're kind of muddying it. Because World War One, the point of World War One is it was a completely tragic, pointless waste of life. But if you're then going to include the Falklands, well, the Falklands was an entirely defensive war from Britain because their sovereign territory had been attacked. And then people also bring it up in terms of, oh, these soldiers who died in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's well, those are very different wars. Those were illegal invasions we had no business doing in the first place. So yeah, it's all very different. Oh, hello. That's my little kind of music. I don't know why that started playing, but yeah, because I pressed play. You would think seeing as I've been playing this video the whole time. But anyway, that's some tunes I was listening to while I was working on a little script for a video.
Faith starts falling apart, because what is even the value of faith? Why is faith, believing in something despite evidence or evidence that you can't see, why is that the highest moral value for a God? over compassion, over integrity, over love, over, all choose a virtue, choose a core value.
So for the record, faith is not a moral value because faith is not a work. Morality relates to your works, but faith is, of course, very famously not a work. So faith isn't a moral value. In fact, actually, you know what? The video that's going... What a bit of serendipity. The video that's going up today is on this little doozy. I'm sure you know. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. Now, obviously, you won't be surprised to know, defenders of the gospel as I am, that I take some time to clarify that this is not talking about salvation. So you shouldn't read that and say, oh, I'm nothing because I don't have charity, even though I have faith. That means I'm not saved by faith alone. No, obviously, it's not talking about salvation. Indeed, what... and of course, if you know anything about 1 Corinthians, you'll know this. Paul is talking about how to have a proper Christian church. How should Christians behave when they gather together? So he's saying in that context, it doesn't matter if you have like really strong faith. If you are being disruptive, if you are acting in bad faith, if you are not being charitable to your fellow church members, then you are nothing in terms of building up the church. Now, I don't know whether or not that definitely means that is the highest moral value for God, but perhaps it is. I mean, it seems like Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, was saying when Christians get together, when we do church, the main thing we should have is charity. And by the way, I should clarify, this is talking about charity. This is the King James Version. Charity in this context means the same way we talk about being charitable to someone you're having an argument. So not so much giving people money, but understanding what people are saying in a positive light, not being unnecessarily adversarial. Which, of course, again, if you know anything about 1 Corinthians, you know why that's the thing that Paul stresses. And, of course, the other good thing about that translation of 1 Corinthians 13 is that it avoids the people who use the word love, which then leads to that chapter being read at wedding ceremonies. And not to say that charity isn't an important thing to have in a marriage, but it leads to a lot of confusion because that chapter is not talking, and indeed that entire book is not, well, actually no, 1 Corinthians 7, but then people don't want to read 1 Corinthians 7 because that goes against a lot of what people would say in society. Anyway, but it's talking about how the love between people in a church, not love between a man and a wife.
All of that would be better than faith. Why is faith at the highest peak of our moral hierarchy of values here? It starts just to make no sense. So what we're seeing is that theology school is creating atheists, and when we look at Harvard Divinity School, it is now being run by an atheist. Greg Epstein has been the non-believing human.
Oh, Epstein. Wow, what a shock. I mean, it's not as if there's a certain group of people who really don't like Jesus, who have a lot of influence in academia, is it?
This chaplain at Harvard since 2005. He's an atheist. He said regarding his chaplaincy's mission that his goal is to serve students who find themselves without faith, highlighting a need for spiritual care that goes beyond religious structures. Now, what we don't know, what I can't tell you, is the percentage of Christians who lose their faith in theology school. We can only guess at this because we don't have a lot of studies on that, for one. And the studies that we do have, like everything.
Oh, well, yes, of course. Sorry, I didn't even think to mention. Sorry, Bold and Brash is saying, I would say love is the highest moral value in virtue in Christianity. Yeah, of course, the two commandments are love the Lord God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So yeah, actually that would seem to be what stands up. And of course, it makes sense to say that charity extends from love. So, of course, then you get to a question of is all morality always about love? And then you kind of say, well, maybe you could say morality is the biggest moral virtue.
Is so private. Like you people talk about their going through their doubt phases behind closed doors, and so it's not even something that's discussed openly. And so we can't get a sense of the numbers, but our best guess, because we do have one study from the Fuller Seminary that said about a third of people experience a major crisis of faith while in seminary, so a third. And then of that group, so that's like 33%, of that group, 10% will move on to some kind of more nuanced version of faith. And then about 20% will lose their faith altogether. And so maybe that's not a lot, like, 1 in 5.
It would be
from
interesting
that
to
study.
see this compared to like overall American statistics, because of course the reality is that America had cultural Christianity for far longer than the UK did, or let's say far more recently than the UK. The UK has not really had cultural Christianity for generations. Most people's grandparents in the UK are not Christians. Whereas I think it's fair to say most people's grandparents in America probably are Christians. There's a lot more, and I mean, of course, in The Simpsons, right? They go to church every Sunday, and that's just like, yeah, of course, they're an American family. Obviously, they're going to go to church every Sunday. Whereas obviously that's not a thing. No one would even think if they are depicting a typical family in the United Kingdom at any point in the last years, again, decades, generations, no one would think to depict that typical family as going to church every Sunday. So the significance there is, of course, it means that we would expect that because there is this cultural Christianity where going to church is a thing that you're just expected to do, and it's not necessarily motivated by any sort of sincere belief, that you would see a lot of people who were raised Christian in the United States stopping being Christian. Again, not because, well, just because of the fact that there are so many people who right now are going through the motions, and as it becomes less significant, it's just going to fall off. Why is the UK atheist? That's an interesting question, and I don't entirely know the answer. I'm not really sure when and why it started, because I certainly know that even by the time of World War II, you just wouldn't expect people to be Christians. A lot of people, and yeah, like I say, most people's grandparents are atheists in the UK.
But just like imagine a medicine program where 1 in 5 people who go in to become a doctor come out not believing in science anymore. Like, that's still a lot. Like, these are people who didn't want to lose their faith. They were all in people like me who lose their faith in theology school. So across.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, there was a big push in the UK to get people to identify as atheists, and that's actually kind of an interesting thing. There were a lot of people on the census in the UK who ticked their religion as Christian, even though they didn't go to church, even though they had never read the Bible, just because I think, and it's something you see even in the UK now with Muslims. A good example would be Ash Sarkar is a political commentator in the UK. She is a feminist. She's pro-trans. I mean, she's incredibly pro-trans. So, for example, there's Zara Sultana, and she's, in case you can kind of not tell by her name, someone who identifies as a Muslim. If you look at Ash Sarkar's Twitter page, one of the first things, one of the few things written as a description in her bio is Muslim. But, I mean, how many... she's pro-LGBTQ, she's just a feminist, she's your generic left-wing progressive, but for her, let's be real, Muslim is an ethnic identity. And there are many people who treat religion as an ethnic identity. And that's what I think a lot of people were doing in the UK with the census. They were just saying, oh, I'm Christian because I'm from a Christian background. That doesn't even mean that their parents were religious. It doesn't even mean their grandparents were religious. It just means that they are ethnically Anglo-Saxon. And I think that's literally all it came down to.
Across the board, what we do know from the studies that we do have, and again, we can't get a sense of the numbers.
And of course, sorry, just to say, the ethnicity relation to religion thing is obviously very important if you look at Northern Ireland. To say that you are Irish is to say that you are Catholic, whereas to say that you are British is to say that you are Protestant.
But when you hear someone say I became an atheist in theology school, it's very common.
Thwigo Mesa, who I believe is also new, I believe I've never seen one ex-Christian who did not have just a nominal Christian background or incredibly fundamentalist. Yeah, I think that's like interesting, because when I think about a lot of the Christians I know, these are people who are evangelical, they are reading the Bible regularly, they are like very interested in unpacking these difficult stories. And in my mind, I'm like, well, there's no way these people are going to not continue to be Christian. I don't think so. My wife's family is very serious about Christianity, but again, not serious in the sense of being fundamentalist, but serious in the sense of being kind of grounded in history, grounded in theology, and like I say, my wife's brother went to seminary. I don't expect that any of my nieces and nephews on that side of the family will become fall away from the faith. I certainly have no expectation that my children will fall away from the faith, because again, I think that I'm very capable of instilling in them a confidence that Christianity is true, because I'm very interested in talking about these difficult topics. So there's very little chance they'd suddenly be confronted with these ideas they'd never heard of before. I don't know, I said a TH there.
But across the board, the main reasons for losing faith include, looking at the Bible with a critical...
So my...
Oh dear. A-level maths.
lens, with a historical critical method lens, and realizing that the Bible has multiple authors and contradictions. It's culturally situated in a context. Going into the philosophy of religion, grappling with the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, which is like, if God is here, like where's God? Alex O'Connor had
by the way, I will say there's another issue, and I've complained about university. Something that university engenders is a sense of not thinking through what's being said critically, just learning to repeat it so you can get good grades. This is something that I've spoken about before. Me personally, I studied international relations at university, and I didn't even start to think about what theory, because there's different theories of international relations. There's realism, there's liberalism, there's the English school, there's post-structuralism. Yeah, there's all these different conceptions of and there's even there's neo-realism and stuff like that, so variations on the theories. And I got plenty of good grades from saying, oh, so and so academic who advocates for the English school said this, but such and such academic from the neo-realist school said this. And you can write that and you can get a good grade without ever actually thinking, well, who do I think is right? Who do I think is actually saying the correct thing here? So it doesn't encourage you to think critically about what's being said. And yeah, it wasn't until I really was kind of done with my university education I started thinking, well, actually, let me actually think. Yes, I wrote that stuff and I presented it as a good, worthwhile argument because I needed to flesh out my essay with lots of arguments that shows that I've done all of the reading. But were any of those arguments actually any good? And I feel like that's something which probably applies, obviously it applied to me doing international relations. I imagine it applies to theology too, where if you are given a certain essay topic and you have to show that you've engaged with academia and you have to give multiple different opinions, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time thinking, I need to get this essay done. Let me look at what all these people have said. Let me present their arguments and just act like they are arguments worth presenting. And that is going to condition you to not think through what these people are saying. And it's so interesting how many times you do just get straight up appeals to authority on the matter of biblical scholarship. Where I remember one time, somebody said, oh, the Bible's so contradictory, I can't believe how contradictory it is. I said, well, can you give me a single contradiction in the Bible? And they said, yeah, I'll give you a contradiction in the Bible. The Bible says that there is one God, but we all know that actually the Bible held to what do people say? I think it's a henotheistic religion, where actually they believe that there are multiple gods, but the Yahweh is just the main God. And I was like, but where's that in the Bible? And I remember they replied with this verse that just mentioned God, but then they included a little academic commentary that was like, this was written with reference to the God of blah 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 blah, and it was just this academic commentary. I was like, that's not like, okay, maybe that academic knows what they're talking about, I don't know, but that's not a contradiction in the Bible. Like, you're essentially acting as if what scholars have said about the Bible is akin to the Bible itself, and at that point you're kind of acting a bit crazy, right? It's sort of, if you look at, I always like to make analogies to paleontology, I don't know why, but no one would say that what scholars have said about the bones is equivalent to the bones themselves, because the scholars can be wrong, but the bones can't be wrong. Bones are what they are. Like, what someone says about the truth can change, but the truth is always going to be what it is.
A debate one time where he asked someone, like, I've been, Alex O'Connor, like me, is an atheist. He started out more atheistic than I did. I kind of made that transition, but he also spent a lot of time in school studying God and theology and religion. And he asked someone he was in debate with, I've looked for God. I've lived like a Christian. I've read everything. I've prayed. I've fasted. I've studied. I read the poems. I read the mystics. I'm trying everything to be able to have some kind of experience with God, and nothing. And so the debater in response said, and like, this was I guess the best answer that you can do with this question. He said that Alex is a better atheist for the world than if he were a Christian, because he helps to refine Christianity and religion with his questions and with his critiques. So God is absent because God would rather have Alex be an atheist. And so that was an interesting answer to watch that play out in debate. And then also, like, epistemology. How do you know that your religion is true?
Sorry, was that supposed to be an argument? I mean, that's... someone asked me... So, as it happens, I was just checking my phone because I got a comment on a thread. I got asked a really interesting question. So, essentially, I was... in a recent video, I spoke about the providential view of biblical preservation, and how do we know that the Bible we have is the correct Bible? And I said, well, because if you're a Christian, God wouldn't let you have the wrong Bible. So... that you just, if you want to know if you got the right Bible, pick up your Bible and say, and like, it's going to be the right Bible, because why would God give you the wrong Bible anyway? And someone replied and they said, well, hold on a minute, by that logic, couldn't they? And this was something which vaguely annoyed me, because it was an example. The specific reason I was giving that argument, I was giving it as an argument against Catholicism, because Catholics ask, how can you, as evangelicals who reject the authority of the Catholic Church, still believe that you have the correct Bible? So I was arguing against Catholicism, but this person was very clearly an atheist, and they were like acting as if the argument was applying to them, that I was saying, oh, I know that the Bible is true because of this providential view or whatever, from the perspective of atheism, which obviously is not true. The reasons why I know the Bible is true from the perspective of atheism are going to be very different, because that's going to be about how do I know that God exists and stuff like that. Anyway, whatever. But they asked, well, couldn't a Muslim say that that God wanted them to have the Quran? So then they'd be like, wouldn't that be valid? And I replied to them a few earlier today, and I said, well, actually, maybe God does want them to have the Quran. It's not inaccurate to say God wants them to have the Quran, because if they read the Quran, they will see that it commands Muslims to judge by the Gospels. Obviously, I know this is like saying that this is like baby's first criticism of Islam, but to be honest, even a baby should be able to recognize Islam as false. So yeah, you can look and you can see it says judge by the Gospels and what God has revealed therein, and therefore it's actually not unreasonable to think that God wants Muslims to have the Quran. And actually, this woman of course said, oh, most people haven't even heard of the one true God, and you can apply that to more broadly, obviously, when you talk about uncontacted tribes and stuff like that. But people always say, oh, what about these Muslims? They're raised in this Islamic country. It's gonna be really hard for them. It's like, actually, with the Quran, they have everything they need to become Christian. All they have to do is read the Quran, see that it says judge by the Gospels, then read the Gospels, be like, well, the Quran told me to judge by these, so, and then become Christian. So yeah, Muslims really they're really without excuse, and it's very unfortunate for them that they fail to recognize that. But yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that God divinely ordained that they would have the Quran so that they would then be led to Jesus if they were honest, if they read it in a sincere way, which clearly they're not interested in doing. But with that said, it's not necessarily unreasonable to think that there might be a purpose God has for certain people being atheists.
True. When everyone believes their ism is true, like then something else must be going on here.
Again, this is why atheists end up becoming postmodernists. It's possible that lots of people disagree on stuff, and that's because some of them are wrong.
Comparative religion, when you start realizing that Christianity is not unique when it comes to other religions. Virgin births are a dime a dozen. Buddha, Egyptian gods. Whenever we want to make someone special in a story, we do a virgin birth because we want.
Yeah, okay. The thing is, this is missing all the theological substance of the virgin birth. Like, the Buddha was not born to a virgin. I don't even know if this is true. The Buddha was born to a virgin, but I mean, obviously, I don't think it's. I mean, to be fair, like, it could be true. Who knows? I don't know, but whatever. Like, there's some other supernatural thing going on there, but I don't even know if it's believed by the majority of Buddhists, because I know that like a lot of this. Horus has the exact same narrative story as Christianity. That's an incredibly over-exaggerated claim based on loads of nonsense. And I think also like a lot of this stuff is actually stuff that was added in response to Christianity, but just because the gods themselves are considered older, people think, this must have been something that was added earlier on. But yeah, anyway, the thing is, the Buddha, there's no story about him being completely free from sin and then dying on a cross to take up, or in some way taking the punishment for everyone else's sins. So you don't have that significance of the virgin birth, which is what you get with Christianity, where Jesus was conceived not even through the act of sex, which is in a sense intrinsically sinful. Obviously, we're not Catholics. We recognize it's perfectly okay for a man and wife to have sex. Indeed, Mary did have sex. Sorry, Catholics, get over it. She was married to Joseph. Jesus had brothers and sisters. Boom, Mary had sex. But she didn't have sex prior to giving birth to Jesus.
Want this character to come into the world not the way that everybody else does, which is like someone having sex in the shed in the back or whatever. So we always do a virgin birth backstory to important people. And then there's the moral distress, coming into contact with the Bible's violence and sexism and problematic texts that have caused real harm into the world. And so if you accept that this is the way that God spoke to us, and God knew that certain verses would cause unbelievable suffering, then God either wasn't powerful enough to influence the text, or not good, or doesn't.
What verses in the Bible caused unbelievable suffering? I'm trying to work out what that is. Like what? Because I can understand the argument you could say that the Bible describes suffering, but I'm not sure what verses in the Bible are supposed to have caused unbelievable suffering. And even if they have, doesn't the moral responsibility there lie with the people? Like there's this idea that like God has to like hold your hand or whatever. Like if someone takes a Bible verse and totally misrepresents it in a way that causes suffering, that's very much on that person.
Doesn't care or doesn't give a shit, right? And then there's also the peer deconstructions, finding out that even professors that you thought were like, hey, he's smart, he must know something that I don't. This was part of it for me, because when I was younger, I really believed that these adults are smarter than me. So they see something then that I don't. And then when you get behind closed doors, you realize all your professors are deconstructing their faith and doing mental gymnastics, and they struggle with some aspects of faith. And when you learn that the people you thought who were smarter than you,
So I think it's a perfect half moon.
Who maybe...
This is your brain when you're... We made brain...
had reasons for their faith that you didn't see yet. When you realize that they're quietly doubting too, it can also blow up your own faith. And the big secret this TikTok thing went viral, which is, what is the common knowledge in your field that general people don't know? And for sure, the thing we all know in theology school is that the Bible is complicated, that things are allegorical at best because literal interpretations can't be true, and the Bible itself cannot all be true. And that everyone has doubts and non-literal beliefs, and then they're expected as pastors to give the congregation the certainty that the congregation wants, even though they know that it's more complicated than that.
Again, I don't really know where this is coming from. Obviously, I mean, as far as I know, my pastors haven't even been to seminary, so maybe we're free from all this. But I mean, just for the record, and obviously, I'm not in any way a pastor. I'm not qualified to be a pastor because I don't have children. But for the record, I don't know anything that I am keeping secret in the hope that someone watching this channel will be like, oh, ooh, this guy, he's so confident, so he must be right. No, I mean, I think I've said what my big challenges with the Bible are. Number one, and even then though, so the big one I always bring up is hell. I always say, like, that is something which is confusing to me, and I've pretty much said my opinion on that. Someone asked, by the way, I'll go back because someone asked a very reasonable question. And I just wanted to address this because it's something I don't really address on this channel, partially because the truth is I know that, and obviously I've been on an atheism thing recently, but if you actually look, you'll know that I am very much interested in dealing with Catholicism as well. The issue is that if I'm going to focus on like that niche sectarian disagreement between Catholics and Protestants, if you like, then I'm limiting my potential audience. So I'm always like, I don't want to limit that further by then introducing the various ways in which I do have somewhat liberal theology. But someone asked, I'm just going to Control F this. Oh, there we go. Someone asked, Mojo said, I am very interested in how you defend affirming the LGB within the realm of the Christian faith. I'm going to address this now because I think it's something that is worth addressing. So essentially, my position on the LGB of Christianity is that I have no such inclination myself to be gay, and because I don't have that inclination, I don't know that it is definitely a sin, because with most other sins, I kind of get the inclination right. Like, I understand stealing. The truth is, honestly, if I knew that tomorrow I could go to the bank and I could just make it so £100 would leave 10,000 people's accounts and go into mine, and I would have £1 million. I would be very tempted, right? But then if someone said, oh, also, you can be romantically involved with another man, I'd be like, okay, no, thank you. So it's not something I relate to. So I'm always a bit, I stop myself short of saying, well, obviously we all know being gay is a sin, because it feels weird to say that about something where I don't have the experience of it. So I actually don't know if it's a sin. Obviously, the Bible talks about homosexuality being a sin, but there is that question of what actually was homosexuality like for the ancient Greeks. I mean, we all know about like the Roman Towboys thing. A lot of it would have been very predatory, which indeed a lot of it is even now. But the question I always have with the LGBT thing is it possible for somebody to be gay and they're not promiscuous, they're not predatory, they are committed to a monogamous, faithful relationship? And if that's the case, can I then confidently say that their relationship is immoral and sinful just based on the fact that it's two men or two women? And the answer there is I cannot confidently say. And as such, I would have some leeway, and I would say, look, if you are genuinely saying like that's where you're at, whatever, that's on you. I can't know one way or the other. But the other thing I would make a point of stressing is when it comes to the overall community, the movement, literally pride, pride festival, and obviously pride is a serious sin, absolutely we should condemn that. So I just want to establish where I'm at, which is I'm certainly, I would not claim to be a theological conservative on that issue, but I also would reject the label of being a theological liberal. And the other thing I just want to say, because I was thinking about this recently, is obviously in Romans 1, it talks about gay people being reprobates. But the key thing to say there is actually, it doesn't say gay people are reprobates. It says that reprobates are gay. But I think that's a very important distinction to bear in mind, because it's not surprising to me that a deeply evil, sinful person would be gay. Because essentially, or let's be real, they're more likely bisexual. Because if you are not discerning with your morality, if you're not discerning with your treatment of other people, which is basically what a psychopath is, then it's logically less likely that you will be discerning in terms of who you are having physical relations with. So it's not really surprising that you would see these people tending to have that preference. But the question is, are we getting the causality mixed up there? So I can understand the Bible saying, well, there were these people who were really, really evil, and God just totally condemned them to most debased, disgusting sexual behavior, and then part of that includes same-sex relations. But that's not quite the same thing as saying that anybody who is inclined towards that must necessarily be that evil, debased person. So that's my attitude towards it. And one of the other issues is that I've just never heard a absolutely compelling logical moral argument against homosexuality. So, and that is in contrast to, and I'm not a divine command theorist, so for all of the Bible, I actually believe it is important to defend it morally, to say, whatever you're going to say on the issue of slavery, for example, that actually there is a moral defense of the Bible's position on that issue. Because if you don't do that, then you run into the issue of Muslims being able to say, well, if the Quran is true, then it's perfectly moral for a 52-year-old man to have sex with a 9-year-old girl. No, it's not. So, yeah, for me, it's important to have an independent moral defense of the moral content of your religion. And as of now, I do not have a clear moral condemnation of the act of homosexuality itself. But yeah, for political intents and purposes, it's sort of a distinction about a difference, because obviously, as I have made clear several times now, the socio-political manifestation of LGBT activism is obviously very much condemnable. I'll just finish this up because... No, not finish it up, rather. I think we'll get to the halfway point, and then we'll aim to finish this on Friday.
And so in seminaries, behind closed doors, it's...
Oh my goodness, yeah, I've heard this, yeah. So Unzalama Masinga, yeah. Casey, how long does your church take to finish? Mine takes 8 hours. It starts at 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Yes, I one time was speaking to someone from Lesotho, and they were saying that they have like 8-hour churches. And I was like, that is crazy. So for context, my church lasts about an hour. Oh my goodness, you're going to be so shocked. An hour and 15 minutes. So I was about to say an hour and 45, and I was like, no, not even. So it starts at 10:30 and usually ends at about 11:45. Really, we tend to just start wrapping up at 11:45, and we kind of end up like it being over just before 12. But yeah,
totally normal to go to school and for your teacher to say things like Genesis is clearly, a mythical origin story, and it's borrowing these Babylonian sources, or Isaiah is written by at least 3 different authors, or look at how these nativity accounts contradict each other. These are not just fringe claims. This is consensus among biblical scholars, even those who are believers, right? And so in seminary, you're trained to hold complexity. You're trained to read ancient languages. You're trained to understand historical context and literary form. You learn that.
Okay, That almost seemed like a good moment for a cut, but I don't know.
Sacred texts weren't written in a vacuum and weren't dropped from the sky. They're shaped by politics and power and oral tradition and the anxieties of an ancient people who don't even know what germs are, trying to make sense of the world. And that honesty never makes it to the pulpit, because the modern church isn't built to hold that kind of uncertainty. Most congregants, most religious people don't come to church for nuance. They come for clarity and comfort and a sense of meaning, and they want answers and they want confidence. They want their pastor to say, here's what God wants you to do, not, well, ancient scribes disagreed about this, and this Hebrew word here is ambiguous, and the archaeology complicates things further. Like, pastors know this. They've been trained to hold multiple interpretations, while at the same time training to dumb things down to protect the faith of their flock.
I would point out, I think there's a degree of cynicism here, which is inappropriate. This idea that the purpose of church is to be all about these niche theological issues is, I think, nonsense. I mean, we responded we responded at one time to a Catholic who was talking about having apparently been previously Protestant, and one of their big complaints are like, oh, I was sat in Protestant church, I didn't hear anything from the church fathers. It's like, well, why would you have to? Why this need to hear? And yeah, I felt like that's kind of the same vibe here. Like, oh, I didn't hear my preacher mention Bart Ehrman at any point. It's like, well, kind of why would he? In reality, you know, I think there is a value in sermons being academically edifying to a degree, but that's not the only thing they need to be. And when you're in seminary, when you're at a theology class, it only needs to be about the academia. It would be weird if a lecturer stood up in a theology class and started teaching about how drunkenness is a sin and how people need to deal with the scourge of drunkenness in their lives, because that's not that. I mean, yeah, obviously you don't even need to tell you why. That would be a weird thing. Whereas of course that is something that a pastor should be doing. So hello, I did a bit of a weird breathe thing there. I always do weird breathe things anyway. So yeah, basically a pastor needs to preach on morality, and he also needs to actually, yes, offer some assurance to people, because he is speaking to people who already have faith. Now, if the pastor doesn't believe, like if he actually thinks Christianity is not true, he should step down, obviously. Like that is, like, he should not be in that position as someone who genuinely doesn't believe. But if there's just some complicated theology or complicated textual criticism that he's aware of, but it doesn't stop him from believing, I don't know why he would have the need to bring that up to his congregation's attention, except for maybe to warn them. And there are people who will kind of do that, but yeah, it's not really a sermon thing. I don't think that's because it's about trying to protect people's faith. Anyway, so church isn't a theology school or college. Yes, I think very well said, bold and brash. And on that note, we will say goodnight for tonight, and I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you had a gay old time, as they say, and I will see you all probably either Friday or Saturday. Last time I said it would be Saturday, but then actually we went to a bonfire night thing on Saturday. So, right, I'll see you all later, and have a blessed rest of your working week, and I will see you for the weekend, one way or other. I don't think I've got anything going on this weekend. All right, bye.